So we are live now.
So then I think we can start. So I'm very proud to have you here in the name of All Quest for Human Rights. So and especially that we have this evening the opportunity to talk about the situation of human rights in Saudi Arabia. So we are facing a lot of challenges looking forward to the situation in this country. And I was very happy while I was asked to prepare with you this evening. So Julia Legner, Lina Altalul, Hala, we already had the opportunity to speak a few weeks ago, and you have seen that everybody's, or a huge number of my colleagues was very interested to discuss with you. So let me start to introduce you first. So when I'm well informed, we took over the patronage in different parties of the Deutsche Bundestag. So I would like to welcome as well Frank Heinrich, who I don't see on the screen yet, but I'm sure he will come a few minutes ago and enter to this meeting. I highly welcome Amit Nuripur from the Greens Party, Gide Jensen from the Liberals Party, and Katrin Vogler from Die Linke, and of course, Bärbel Kofler in her special mission as special representative for human rights in the German Bundestag. So Halal Al-Dosari is also taking part of our meeting as a Saudi activist and scholar, and she's a writer as well. And Lina Al-Hatul is the younger sister of the well-known, I should say, you will talk about Lujan, your brother, Al-Hatul, and he's in jail, if I'm well informed nowadays. And this situation is very, very pity, so that we have to care about this situation as well. So I would like to welcome Ala Al-Sadiq as well, as Emirati activist and researcher, and Julia Legner, of course, as independent human rights consultant and head advocacy. And you are taking part of this conference from London, if I'm well informed. But let's start immediately so that we don't waste time. So I would start to open this evening with some remarks and some welcome and key speeches from Bärbel Kofler. So, dear Bärbel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for having me with a few opening remarks, because I'm sure the key speakers are the activists from Saudi Arabia who give the information from the ground, which is very important for us. And I want to thank all of you for your engagement and for your courage and for participating in that round. So simply a few remarks in the beginning from my side. And I'm very happy that we can join in a round like that, and with such a lot of knowledge and engagement from everybody here in this round. Well, it's well timed actually, this meeting, because it's a few days ahead of the 8th of March, International Women's Day. And I think it shows us that we reached in the last century a lot of positive moments, or we achieved a lot of positive moments if it's coming to women's rights, but there is still a long way to go, and we have many challenges and facing many challenges, and we have to accomplish a lot of things to really reach gender equality. If we look a little bit back, it's at the moment like that, maybe a few remarks on that. Last year, we were celebrating 25th anniversary of the big International Women's Conference of Beijing, a real important meeting and a real important agenda for women's empowerment, which was basically in a globally accepted document established in that meeting. But if you look closely, We have this very special document, but a lot of topics and demands from that Beijing Declaration are still not accomplished, and we are far away from having those documents implemented on the ground in all our countries on various levels and various fields and with various challenges. But I think all over the planet, there's still a lot of work to do. And even worse, we are facing more and more not only language, which is pushing back equality and women's rights, but also action. We are facing action in international organizations and levels in a lot of countries. So we have to fight the pushback. The pushback, Michelle Bachelet is always pointing out. And that's something I think we can learn also from that document 25 years ago in Beijing declared. Well, next week in Germany, we have another second important day. If it's coming to women's rights, it's Equal Pay Day next week, Wednesday, the 10th. So that means the first 2.5 months we worked for free in Germany as women, because only the 10th of March is the day when we then would have the same amount of money like our male colleagues. So it's the gender pay gap we are facing as one of the challenges in our society. In a lot of other societies also, but it's not the only challenge. Another important point to remember is in this year we have another celebration, another anniversary. It's the 10th year of Istanbul Convention. So if we're coming to think about violence against women, it's another important point. We have this legal or this human rights treaty of the Council of Europe, and it's as a first legal binding instrument to combat violence against women. It's a very important step, but also in those cases, we see a lot of pushbacks. We see still growing violence. We see violence against women used as a weapon in conflicts, sexualized violence as a weapon in conflicts. And we're still in the 21st years of the foundation of the declaration of the UN resolution 1325. We still don't have all the tools we need to fight against those abuses, terrible threats against women and their integrity, even in their possibility to be the master of their own body. So the third important anniversary, I think, is the 21st year on UN Resolution 1325. And that would be also a tool. We just launched yesterday in the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Germany the third national action plan on that agenda, on this Resolution 1325. That would be a tool also to empower women. And I think that is a very crucial and a very important aspect, is we have not only to protect women against violation and sexual abuses, we have to empower women. And it's very, well, shameful, it's a pity that we all know, UN Women has proved by studies that, for example, women, if they are included in peace-building processes, are leading to a more sustainable peace, to solve conflicts much better. But still, if you look at the figures, more than 75% of all peace negotiators are men. So there is still a lot of work to do in all those topics. One thing, and that's maybe leading also to your topic in the evening today, is very close to my heart. It's the situation of human rights defenders. And human rights defenders face, male or female, a lot of challenges and terrible obstacles, long-term prison sentences, massive violence, even death threats in a lot of cases. That's for male, female, for all human rights defenders, a real big issue. But for women, we have additional challenges. And those challenges have to do with gender-specific threats of violence. And it's always, or it's in many cases, it's the reason is that women rights defenders challenge their traditional societies also. It's not only that they fight for human rights as a whole, but it's also the challenge of traditional role understanding and role models in various societies. And I think that is an important point, maybe for the further discussion on Saudi Arabia and the situation of human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia and the area, not only there, but also in this area too. So it is very important to show also solidarity with those human rights defenders, especially women human rights defenders, because what I learned in many cases is this international public solidarity and broad public awareness is supporting in a lot of cases, is helping and is protecting. So I hope we can also be a little bit part of a network in protecting human rights defenders in various places, but today we are concentrating on Saudi Arabia, but it's of course also true in other areas of the world. So I'm very keen to learn from you, especially from Saudi Arabia, and that's why I shut up now, to learn from you in Saudi Arabia. What are your challenges you're facing? I learned, of course, about the case of your sister, Lina Al-Hatul. So I'm very pleased to know that she was released, but there are still threats, probably also to you and your family, but also a lot of other people in prison still in simply trying to fight for normal civil rights and for their personal freedoms and rights in Saudi Arabia. So I'm very keen to learn from you and your point of view on the perspectives of civil society, perspectives in Saudi Arabia, and what maybe also could be done from our side to support and come out with the right impacts and the right ideas to support you. Thanks for organizing that. Thanks to all who organized it, to Alkis, to my colleagues in the parliament from various parliamentary groups already represented who were organizing that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a really interesting panel, to a challenging discussion. And unfortunately, I can't stay all the time because I have to go to another meeting. But I wish you all the best, and my doors are always open for you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Bärbel. So if we, you already mentioned that we have to face the International Women's Day next Monday. So it's very interesting to analyze the situation in Saudi Arabia. And when we read the journals here in Germany, I remember that we wonder why Princess Balma is in jail. We wonder what are the consequences of the killing of Khashoggi. And we wonder if the opportunity for women to get a driver license is more than a symbol for equal rights. So, but these are just a few questions that we can ask. But your position is much more interesting for us. So we are going to hand over, if you allow, to Halal Al-Dosari, to Lina Al-Hatul, and of course to Ala Al-Siddiq, and finally to Julia Legner, to learn more about the situation in women, and most of all about their rights and maybe their opportunities and threats in Saudi Arabia. So let me first introduce Halal Al-Dosari, who I already mentioned. She's a Saudi Arabian activist, scholar and writer, and she's well known for the advocacy for women's rights in Saudi Arabia. She holds, as I learned, a PhD in health services research from Old Dominion University, with her research concentrating on the, and I was astonished to read that, on epidemiology of violence against women and its adverse health outcome in Saudi Arabia. So we are very interested to hear about you. What is the situation? And maybe you can mention also the situation of the pandemic that you are facing in Saudi Arabia. What can be very interesting for us. So Hala, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and thank you, the other distinguished members, for having us. And I think this is brilliant in this time of increased scrutiny, increased opportunity, actually, to learn more about Saudi Arabia and devise certain policies, different types of policies. That's why I'm very excited to be here with you today. Saudi Arabia has captured actually the world's attention the last few years with a mixed picture of both reforms and repression. So indeed, we have seen certain reforms which ease the restrictions on women's autonomy and mobility under the male guardianship system. And we've seen that Saudi Arabia now has allowed, as the last country in the world, has allowed women to drive, to travel, obtain passports, family documentation without the consent of a male guardian as before. But yet, as Ms. Colfer said, there is much to remain in terms of civil and political rights, family laws, civil society reforms, the situation for women activists to push against any kinds of repercussions and to be protected in pursuing more and greater reforms. Saudi Arabia in the Gender Gap Report of 2020 have scored 146 out of 143 countries, mainly due to problems in women's access to political participation and in economic and opportunities and women's access to economic opportunities and resources. So the announced reforms, as many of you know, have been paralleled by vicious repression in Saudi Arabia, in which most of the components of the civil society, and not only the feminists or the women activists and the men who supported them, were targeted by unprecedented, basically, actions, state-sanctioned actions of smear campaigns of, I'm sure Lina will talk about the situation of her sister, which is a case study of how the government has treated the most prominent women activists. They faced unlawful arrests, public defamation, torture in secret detention facilities, prolonged detention for years, and secret trials in which they were handed unfair sentences of prolonged imprisonment. Of those who were released, they were placed under travel bans and under probation, and they were suspended from resuming their activism and their work, their official work. So basically they are imprisoned, but within their houses. But then the brutal murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi at a Saudi consulate in Istanbul has manifested to the world the complete disregard for the rule of law, for the basic rights, and for diplomatic and international norms that the Saudi regime has embraced recently. In fact, the news of the torture of the women activists has only been revealed because of the murder, because of the leak of the gruesome details of the murder. So for a reform to be meaningful, it has to be grounded in public needs, and it has to be informed by their feedback and engagement at all levels of the state. But in an absolute monarchy like Saudi Arabia, without any kinds of independent institution or public representation, even the advisory council are appointed. And with the rise of the presidency of the state security established by the royal court, which has been involved in so many unlawful operations, both within Saudi Arabia or extra-territorial, we have seen that they've actually diluted the role of the institutions in curbing the power of the state. So the Human Rights Commission, for instance, have been very much constrained. They can't really investigate torture claims. They cannot really intervene in cases of violations against migrant workers, which has been really a problem under the COVID-19 lockdown. We've seen the advisory council have been really, become toothless. They can't really bring any minister or any influential figure for questioning, let alone influencing decision-making. The power, the centralized power, has become a part of the royal court and the state security, the presidency of the state security. So while we are seeing that there are legal reforms on paper, no matter how significant they were, the same problems of how to influence the drafting of these reforms and how to make it universally applied to everyone, where the political manipulation is not possible under the regime, so that certain people are treated differently because of their political opinions, like Princess Basma or the activists in Saudi Arabia. And also the monitoring of how the law has been applied or whether there were any loopholes in the system. And this is mainly the role of the civil society and people who are writers, intellectuals, academics, who have been caught up in those kinds of crackdown. I'm going to give an example. For instance, that even the reforms allowed women to access a driving license, work, ability to live in a separate residence or to travel, they can still be vetoed by a male guardian if he reported that the woman is disobedient or leaving the house against his own consent. So the situation is more dire for women who are foreign, living inside Saudi Arabia or trafficked in Saudi Arabia, or women who are living with a Saudi, foreign women living with a Saudi husband under the sponsorship. More so if the husband is abusive or making use of his Saudi nationality to basically get more privilege in the Saudi courts. So foreign women are, if they were abused by their Saudi husbands, or if they were abused by foreign husbands who are naturally their sponsors, they are not able to report the cases of violence to the state authority, and the state would not allow them access to them or to their children to the state shelters. Most of the time, they are left at the discretion of their own embassies. Most of the time, if they come from embassies of the Asian, for instance, countries or African countries, they're not really addressing the issues, let alone appointing lawyers. And it was part and core of the women activist network inside Saudi Arabia to establish a shelter where women can access, regardless of their nationality or class or economic situation, they can access the shelter with their children. They can have a legal representation. They do not get to be locked up in the shelter like the Saudi women. They cannot, be forced to return to their abuser after he signed a pledge, like the situation now. So you get to see how the protection from abuse law is very, vague in terms of, phrasing the terms. The terms are catch-all phrases. Basically, there is no clear definition of what actions constitute violence. There is no clear mentioning of forced marriages, which happens to a lot of women. There is no clear definition of marital rape, for instance, or female genital mutilation, because these things, the state that doesn't want to recognize that these are practices affecting so many women who are not empowered enough to report the cases within their families. I'm going to talk a little bit about the illegal female workers. There are estimated 10,000 people trafficked from Yemen monthly during the epidemics. They were housed, and I think Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and other international organizations have reported on the dire situation that these people are facing in the deportation centers. Those women, many of them are pregnant. They lack the minimum health care. They are only, exiting the deportation center to, for delivery under the care of a physician, while they're shackled, while their legs are shackled. So it's very, problematic in terms of health, hygiene, or human rights conditions. Some of them have actually been reported dead and beaten by the officers in those facilities. And it's very difficult for the international community to report on these things or to have access to these cases. And it's only, if it's not for the people who have left the country, we wouldn't have got the pictures or got the news of these issues. So reforms in Saudi Arabia, while significant, it has the problematic nature that they are mainly made for political expediency, or to basically attract foreign investments and to accommodate a foreign business community. And this is, in a sense, means that only elites or privileged people are able to enjoy those kinds of issues, while women who used to be marginalized, who actually looked up for those reforms to happen, remain segregated, remain disenfranchised, remain marginalized. So in recommending a foreign policy principles in dealing with Saudi Arabia, it is worth gearing our attention to which Saudi Arabia are we trying to influence by this policy direction. Is it one where there is a clear path to democratic transition? Is it one in which there is a respect to we're not saying the full scope of human rights, but we're saying the minimum scope of human rights where people are able to advocate safely without having to be targeted by all kinds of violent means? Is it one where there is a rule of law and independent institution? Or is it one in which there is an autocratic leader that is legitimized by embracing him from business community, from international community, from political institution, foreign political institution, who's emboldened on a path of destructive intervention in the region and abroad? When countries talk about relationships with Saudi Arabia, they should legitimize and empower the values of democratic change and the respect for human rights and rule of law, and the people working towards them, essentially the intellectuals, the writers, the journalists, and the civil society, and the women, of course. Solidarity and support in public, political, and diplomatic means should be directed to those people for real reforms that actually affects all citizens and actually monitored and accessible for everyone. So Saudis in diaspora, despite this relentless campaign of targeting, have established a political party, still yet in infancy. It was established in September last year. So the political party, the National Assembly Party, it's aimed to promote this kind of vision. It's aimed to promote a different path for Saudi Arabia, one where feminism and human rights are not criminalized or targeted, one where balance and checks are in place to protect against the abuse of power that we're seeing not only in Saudi Arabia, but in Yemen and in Turkey, everywhere, and in Canada and Morocco. As we're speaking, there are people who are being targeted and for extradition to Saudi from Morocco. This depravity of international leadership has created this climate where these kinds of abuses are happening. So it takes actually a moral and an ethical leadership in the international community to treat the Saudi people and their country as a country represented by the people rather than by despotic leaders. So I'm going to stop here. I thank you for the resolution that you're working on, and I'm sure that Magnitsky Act, this resolution, the resolution to protect women human rights defenders, are important tools, but we often fail in bringing them into action, and we always manage to work hard on it's like the Beijing, basically, declaration. We work really hard on making the principles clear and making the commitment clear on paper. But in policies that requires this kind of transformation into action, it seems the political will, the political leadership is still lacking. I'm going to stop here and leave the floor for my colleagues. And thank you.
Thank you, Halal. We're going to switch over to Lina now, Lina Alatul. Lina, you are very young, but you have an older sister, Lujan Alalul, she was very active as activist and driver of the change for women in Saudi Arabia. When I'm well informed, she's still in jail nowadays, but tell us a bit more about the situation of your sister and your engagement, please.
So first, thank you to Al-Qis for organizing this. Thank you to all of you honorable members of parliament. Thank you, Ala, for being here. And thank you, Hala. You're always very brilliant when talking about Saudi Arabia. So I have a good news for you, Mrs. Daniela. Jane has been released, but she is not free. She's under strict restrictions out of jail. I'll just maybe just comment on what Hala just said. She has brilliantly explained how everything written is reforms, but basically, practically, the Saudi people cannot all enjoy these freedoms if they're under a bad male guardian. And she has given very good illustrations of the different reforms that have been given. There's just one thing I want to emphasize on is that the Human Rights Commission that was recently opened, the Human Rights Commission, in my opinion, is really a PR tool for the Saudi government because it doesn't listen to the people. When Jane first got arrested, we really tried to contact them, and they only listen to the West, honestly. They come, they have tours even in Germany. I mean, it's crazy. The Awad Al-Awad, who's the director of the Human Rights Commission, he's always at the European Parliament, he's in Germany, he's in France, he's everywhere, except worse than this. After Lujain's torture, but I will get back to this in a couple of minutes. When Lujain was tortured and we found out about the torture, the only people who were allowed to visit her other than my parents afterwards was the Human Rights Commission. And what the Human Rights Commission did is that they came, they took her testimony, and she gave them everything. She trusted them. And can you imagine, having lived months of torture without even being able to see your parents, and then you have trust in a government institution, and you tell them everything that's happened to you, and they just told her that they cannot protect her, and they left and didn't give any feedback to or continuity to her complaint about torture. So really, this Human Rights Commission is, I would say, the symbol, the very symbol of this Saudi Arabia that tries to seem like it's reforming, but only for the West to see. And what we can also see, I mean, there's so much evidence about it on Twitter. People, when they complain or they ask about Lujain or they ask about the imprisoned activist or about Khashoggi's body, you know, what they do, they just block accounts. So they don't even want to engage with Saudi people. So that was just a comment about Hala's speech and just an illustration about how Saudi Arabia tries to reform for its image, but it doesn't practically, you know, give the power to institution for them to install these reforms and for the Saudi people to be able to enjoy them truly. So this apart, I'm the sister of Lujain, and I've been campaigning. Now she has been released a couple of days ago for her release from the beginning. So Lujain was one of the leaders of the Women to Drive campaign. She got imprisoned the first time in 2014 for that. She got released without any charges. And then when she got out, she realized, because she was in what we call a care home or like a detention center for minors, in which also women who are victims of domestic violence get imprisoned. She realized that the problem was not only about driving, it's about the whole male guardianship system. So she basically broadened her activism once she was out of jail, and she was still campaigning for it. In 2017, she was going into international conferences to speak about the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. And in 2018, at the beginning, she got back to Saudi Arabia, and she got back to the Middle East because she used to live in the Emirates. And in March 2018, she got kidnapped from the Emirates, brought to Saudi Arabia, put on a travel ban. And that was a couple of months before the driving ban was to be lifted. And before that, you know, she was banned from social media, and she also got a call from the state security telling her, hi, Lujain, this is the state security. We just want to inform you that the ban on women driving is going to be lifted. We just ask you not to comment and not to use your social media, which, you know, she accepted. But then in May 2018, they broke into our house in Saudi Arabia. They took her. She was held incommunicado for weeks. Then she only was allowed to call. And what was really surprising to see is that she didn't have any legal charges. But the media all over the place was saying that she was a traitor, that she was a foreign agent, without even telling the family or letting us talk to her or, you know, giving her official charges about this. And what we have seen also that same year, that same moment, MBS, the head of state, was having interviews, one of them being with Bloomberg in 2018, saying that he confirms that my sister and the other activists who have been arrested with her are foreign agents, that they're trying to destabilize the country, and that he has videos that he could show the day after the interview. And so for us, of course, it was shocking to see that, you know, where is our sister first? You know, other than all of this noise that we've been hearing, where is our sister? Why can't we have the basic rights? Why is the head of state talking about it and not us having contact with the legal institutions that are there and that could give us evidence of all of that? So time passed. Lujain got her first visit, and my parents were really shocked about what they saw. They knew she was tortured, but Lujain wouldn't say anything. She had marks all over her body. She was shaking. She couldn't sit. She couldn't look at them properly. She was frightened. And then a couple of months later, as Hala said, after the Khashoggi case, everything seemed clear. It was just, you know, the evidence we needed for us to be able to speak and to ask more about what is happening to the country. And then when my parents read about the Khashoggi case, they read about the reports of torture in hotels, they told Lujain in one of the visits, look, we know what happened to you, now please tell us. And she did. She told them all about the torture. And again, what's so shocking for us to see is that the very government is involved in her torture. The right-hand man of MBS was there, present, ordering the torture, and you know, telling her things that you could never even hear from the worst man you could meet in your life. He was harassing her sexually, you know, asking men to do things to her. So the very government is involved in this. And then when we found out about this, we said, okay, we cannot stay silent anymore. It's just not possible. We thought that silence could be the solution in a state where you could reach out to the government, where you could try to have, you know, arrangements, but there was just no place for talking to the government anymore. No institution was replying to us. The royal court was ignoring us. The state security was ignoring us. So we just didn't have anything to do to save our system, but to speak publicly. And we started. We went to the media, we went to government officials, and they said, you cannot deal with Saudi Arabia without talking about Lujain's case. She's being tortured by the very government. And so day after day, and then at some point, the Saudi narrative started to change. So a year after MBS's first interview, when he was asked the same question, he didn't say she was a traitor. He didn't say he has evidence of her. He just said that the case is not up for him to deal with. It's up to the public prosecutor to deal with. So we see that, you know, pressure started to work. So we just went on, and we had to make it clear that what was happening and what the government was saying was wrong. And then in March 2019, that was really the most surprising part for us. She got finally a trial. She got her charges. And what we see is that it has nothing to do with explicitly, and we published this finally on our website. They accused her of campaigning for women's rights. They accused her of participating to conferences to speak about women's rights in Saudi Arabia. They accused her of talking to journalists, to diplomats, to human rights organizations. So, you know, it was clear to us that now the Saudi government felt like it could explicitly show the Saudi people that activism would put you in jail, and you could have Lujain's faith if you were an activist and demand your basic rights. And when we saw these charges, we talked about them, but the Saudi government still was sometimes saying that, you know, they're in contact with enemy states, and the enemy states that are written in the charges are the EU, the UK, and the Netherlands. So we really insisted on saying, are these enemy states really, why are you in contact with them? And then, you know, again, as absurd as the trial is from the beginning, they changed the charges without telling Lujain, without telling us, without even, you know, mentioning that they changed the charges, and they removed the countries and they just put enemy states, basically. And so, again, we see that pressure works because, you know, these governments, I'm sure we're talking to Saudi Arabia saying, why are we considered as enemies? We're supposed to be allies, etc. And so what I want to end with... Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you before we are running out of time. Let me just ask one question so that we can have the opportunity to listen to Ala and Julia afterwards.
Absolutely.
Your sister was released a few days ago, but were there some condition that she had to fulfill, or what is her current situation for the moment? We have understood that she was raped and beaten, and so what I care about is that, as you mentioned and told us, there is a strategy to ruin the personality. So, and it's very shocking. So what you told, but how is she now, and what is her situation currently?
So the legal conditions under which she was released is that she has a 5-year travel ban. She has a 3-year probation, meaning she cannot commit the crimes she's accused of, which is her activism. And then on the other side, the state security, which has nothing to do with the case, also made her sign a pledge in which she's not supposed to speak about her detention in prison and not to celebrate her release publicly. So basically, she cannot be public anymore.
It's a very hard situation in my view, but maybe we thank you for this testimony. Well, I think it's very important to know, to have all this information, but because I'm sure one of the question that we have, or my colleagues will have afterwards, and might raise their hand by writing in the chat if there are some question, is what can Europe, what can Germany do? So to point this out, but before that, I think we have to listen to Ala Al-Siddiq as well. And you're coming, Ala, from the Emirates, and you are a researcher and activist there. And you are looking on the situation on the whole Gulf region as well. But tell us, what is your opinion, and most of all, what can we do to support you in all these horrible cases?
Thank you all for being here today. I will jump in the topic directly and just give you a brief about inside the GCC country, the similarities and differences and the law and the society argument that usually has been used by the authority. So to be brief and in general, all of them lack equality between men and women, and there is a lack of women's rights. However, some countries are better than others, yet these better changes are not enough to brag about women empowerment success. For instance, the World Economic Forum, in their last report of the gap between genders in 153 countries, the GCC countries ranked below 120. So the best one is UAE 120 and Kuwait 122, Bahrain 133, Qatar 135, Oman 144, and Saudi Arabia 146. All GCC countries are considered high-income countries, and high-income countries like Norway, Finland, Sweden, even Germany are at the top of the list. So what prevent these countries from giving women their rights? They try to use, the authorities try to use excuses for not giving women their rights and put the burden on other groups of the society. But where is the state's power if any other party will hijack the authority and get away with their crime? If they are not cooperating with them or allowing the powerful family to stop their female relatives from reaching the judicial system or change verdicts, or at least not protecting women from any possible risk. So the lack of general human rights, the lack of a freedom of speech, the lack of separation between the authorities affect women's rights directly. Two sad examples that could elaborate that, because they were successfully reaching the outside, are the story of Sheikha Latifa and her sister Sheikha Shamsa. And before that, the story of Hind al-Balluki. She's a refugee now in Germany who escaped the country after threats from her family to arrest her after she wants to get a divorce. Not to mention two other female detainees, Amina al-Abdouli, Maryam al-Blushi, who already served their sentence but not released yet because they tried to reach human rights organizations. So you can see a pattern here of accusing activists or detainees of trying to reach organizations outside their country and accuse them as traitors if they will do that. One of the rights that should not conflict with any party in the society is the right to pass citizenship, which is an absent right in all GCC countries. Some countries try to deceive the international organization and the decision makers that they grant the right still, when we zoom in, we find that this right is available, but in the UAE, for example, but by a decision from the authority when children of Emirati women reached 18. Then they could apply for citizenship and wait for approval from the authority. This led me to the next point, which is the constant pattern of GCC authorities' PR campaigns regarding empowering women globally, while they officially and unofficially repress them locally. The GCC countries' authority thought that by repressing the locals and whitewashing the situation of women's rights, they would change the narrative and showed as a progressive country. These PR's campaign usually occurred by giving high positions to privileged women from upper class and provide crumbs of rights to other women, such as female domestic workers, for example. UAE usually brags about releasing some restrictions on civil life, but which is a good step, and it will surely attract the tourists and investors, but not enough if the expat will enjoy these rights while the locals are suffering. Saudi Arabia now repeating the UAE's approach and changed some laws regarding the male guardianship system, yet it's not removing another law that contradicts with the male guardianship system, which is reports of absenteeism. This occurred before with citizenship law in the UAE, as Hala mentioned before. So as you mentioned also, women are facing more challenges. It could be doubled in our region. So standing in solidarity with them in all possible ways are a much needed approach and a much needed actions towards them inside the GCC countries. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ala. We are going to switch over to Julia Legner now. Julia is an independent rights consultant, and I suppose, Julia, as you are focused on the NGO Alquist for Human Rights, but maybe, as I already mentioned, as MPs, we all times have the same question: what can we do to support you? What can we do to analyze the situation of women, peace and security a bit better? And maybe you have some recommendation for us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. De Ridder, for initiating this conversation, for moderating. Also, thank you to the other MPs, members of the Bundestag, for joining, and to my co-panelists. Well, I just want to keep it short to allow for an interactive discussion and questions. Just want to give a quick overview of what we from the NGO perspective have seen work in the past in terms of actions or international advocacy. So I think for a very long time, the Saudi authorities, they remained unchallenged due to their huge economic capital and influence. But I think the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Turkish consulate really was a game changer, after which the international community has started to be more outspoken and openly critical to the kingdom's policies. And after that, we have seen 3 joint statements by UN member states in the UN Human Rights Council, statements to which Germany, to which Germany participated. We've also seen a resolution in the European Parliament on the situation of women's rights defenders detained in Saudi Arabia, which clearly have led to some concessions on the ground. Like a large part of the women human rights defenders that were initially arrested were then released temporarily. That doesn't mean that they're free. They're still facing charges. But I think international pressure at the UN level, at the EU level has clearly worked. And I'm sure there were a lot of sort of behind closed doors efforts from other governments as well. We've also seen, for example, a change in sentence of the woman Israel Romram from the eastern province in Saudi Arabia. She was the first female who the public prosecution asked the death penalty for her demonstrating, like they call it, illegal participation in demonstrations. And they wanted to sentence her to death for that. So there was a lot of pressure. Actually, another member of the German parliament has taken her up in this parliamentarian support parliamentarians program. And that pressure has led to the fact that she's only been sentenced to 8 years in prison. And obviously with the change of US administration, we have seen also a change in the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. Like the fact that Lena's sister, Lujain, was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months instead of 20 years, what the public prosecution earlier asked for, I think is also partially attributed to the fact that there is a big change in the US foreign policy with the new US administration. And there's no longer ex-president Mr. Trump, who gave the carte blanche to the Saudi authorities and other governments in that region to do as they please without any consequences. We've also seen the release of, for example, Badr Ibrahim, who is the son of Aziz al-Yusuf, another women human rights defender. He's a US and Saudi citizen, and he was released. So I think what we have really learned in the past is that political pressure does help, and particularly this public pressure from politicians and not just the silent diplomacy. And obviously there has to be pressure also from the business community, but maybe that's to be discussed in a different round. I want to make a quick remark about a joint statement that we have initiated on the occasion of International Women's Day, that is supporting Saudi women human rights defenders and their struggle for gender equality. This statement discusses the announced reforms by the government and how they are not sufficient in granting equal rights to women. It also clearly states that any reform, any real reform effort is undermined by the continued detention and prosecution of women human rights defenders. Just to mention that there are Samar Badawi and Nasim al-Sada, two very prominent Saudi women human rights defenders that remain in detention. And those temporary ones released, they are facing heavy restrictions, travel bans, probation periods, and some of them are still facing trial. So we have been circulating this joint statement in support of the women activists in the German, the UK, the Irish, and the European Parliament. And I'm happy to announce that to this day, we already have 28 members of the German Parliament supporting that initiative. And obviously we hope that there will be more to come join that statement, which we will finalize for International Women's Day on the 8th of March. So there's still time to sign on. That is an appeal for those who have not done so yet. In general, recommendations, those that you can also find in that joint statement when it comes to particularly women's rights and the women human rights defenders, recommendations towards the Saudi authorities clearly are to immediately release the detained women human rights defenders who are just detained for their peaceful activism, to drop all the charges against them and to compensate them fairly, and to guarantee that those women human rights defenders that have been temporarily released are granted their right to free movement and their right to continue their peaceful human rights activism without fear of reprisals, and to abolish the male guardianship system and all the laws that discriminate against women. Now, when we come to recommendations to the international community, including German parliamentarians, I think specifically now after the release of the CIA report that again confirmed something that I think many of us already knew, the responsibility of Mohammed bin Salman in ordering or overseeing the killing of Jamal Khashoggi in the consulate in Istanbul. In view of that, I think we would be really, really happy to see sanctions against MBS and other individuals identified in the report who have not already been designated, and to suspend all the arms sales to Saudi Arabia as long as it continues to engage in a consistent pattern of gross human rights violations. So I think really the past has shown that politicians have a huge influence on real human rights reform or concessions in Saudi Arabia, and so does the business community. So I'm just asking, please try to use that leverage and try to make cooperation dependent on certain conditions of improved human rights on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. I'm sure that my colleagues, Katrin Vogler, Gide Jensen, Amit Nuripur, and Frank Heinrich have a lot of questions. So who wants to have the floor, dear colleagues? So don't be so shy. So Amit, will you start, please?
I was hesitating because it's a discussion in the framework of International Day of Women, and men already talk too much all across the year. This is what I was hesitating, but thank you very much, not just for giving me the floor, but especially a huge thank you to our panelists, not only for the insight you gave, which was fruitful and useful for our work, but especially for the work you're doing, which is highly important for all of the people whose rights are violated in this day. Just 1.5 remarks and one question. The first one is, when it comes to symbols, question of driver licenses was for decades this symbol for the oppression of women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Let me look at the other side of a gulf. The symbol of the oppression and suppression of women's rights in Iran always was that women were not allowed to go to football stadiums and watching football matches. I know that there are high tensions between these two countries, but suppressing women's rights is something they have in common. And both of them understood that these symbols are just not helpful for the way they're going. So now there are driver licenses for ladies in Saudi Arabia, and in Iran, ladies can go to football stadium and watching matches. And I think the most important thing for us is not to be misled of this, because the question of equal rights is not decided in cars or in football stadiums, but in courts. And in courts, you just mentioned that. I don't want to repeat what you just said. There is structural suppression of women's rights when it comes to the guardianship, when it comes to the question of heritage, when it comes to the question of women as witnesses, when it comes to public offices, and so on and so on. So I think it's very important for us not to be misled by symbols, but to look at the core of the question, which is the legal framework of those countries. The half remark is, the question of arm sales is highly important, and I think we should address this. My question is about the consequences of the CIA report, which now has been released. And we have now a Magnitsky. We've been told that we shouldn't call it Magnitsky, but there is a Magnitsky Act now in the European Union, and I think it's highly important not only to talk about people who followed orders, but also to talk about people who gave the order, and we know who that is, and we can read the CIA report. My question is, beside of the Magnitsky Act and because of the sanctions, and we know that the worst enemy of justice is impunity, do you think it would be a good idea also to talk about the ICC, and that this issue, especially, of course, the case of Khashoggi, but we know that this is a cliffhanger for much more, should brought also to the ICC?
So thank you, Amit. I would try to, or like to collect the question. And I saw Gide Jensen raising her hand, but maybe she has a question as well. Isn't it, Gide?
Thank you very much also to all participants and for your strong stories. And also thank you, Lina, for your strength, and to Ala and also Hala. Julia, thank you very much for also reaching out to us to have this conversation tonight. Well, I rose both my hands because when Omid said, well, nobody's talking about calling it a Magnitsky Act, but also that is a kind of symbol because it symbolizes someone who also had to go through so much impunity, and at the end he died. So I think I'm going to call it Magnitsky. So that's why I rose by both of my hands. Omid already
ask one of the questions that I also asked myself, and that's regarding ICC. What possibilities do we have to not only go further, also with the new US administration in place, having another cooperative partner at the other side of the Atlantic? I think that is very helpful to start with. And Reporters Without Borders just announced yesterday that they are pushing for that they are pushing for ICC consequences. So I'm very interested in how this process is going. I would not go so far in sanctioning MBS so far, because I think the argument that also the Biden administration made by saying there should be, or there are currently, in their opinion, other means that they could use with regard to MBS. I'm not sure what these measures could be. So I think they should shed some light on that as well. But maybe there are other means. And my question maybe to Lina would be, do you think there should be, or there is another measure that also the international community could take into account before sanctioning? Just because I think sometimes this kind of sanction would, I'm missing the right word, because mocking is not the right word, but if it could lead the whole process to an end where we don't control it anymore. I think that's a very interesting question also for the political community, how to deal with impunity, and on a level of the highest state responsibility, such as MBS. But we can also just take any other politician that is in very high responsibility. And as we have you, Lina, in our public hearing in a few weeks' time on the 5th of May, testifying to the way human rights defenders, especially women human rights defenders, are treated in the world, my question would be, what would you see, or what would you wish for the future, and also for the common for the next German coalition or a government that is coming up, because we're currently in at the end of the term, and things are moving very fast. So maybe if you could have some wishes fulfilled, I would be happy to hear them for the next coalition. Also looking at Omid there. And thank you very much for oh well, that's true, but thank you very much for the stories that you shared, and I really applaud you for this strength also to talk about these very personal things and stories that I think are affecting you as a person very differently from us just listening to it. And sometimes that even in a Zoom conference or in a live stream is a very different thing. So I'm happy to hear from you, Lina.
So thank you, Gida. I'm sure that Katrin and Frank also would like to have the floor. May we start with Katrin? Yeah, and then finally with Frank, yeah, so that we can collect the questions, and maybe Lina can start with the answer round. So Katrin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you all for your very touching insights of the situation you are confronted with in terms of women's rights and generally human rights in Saudi Arabia and in the GCR countries. Saudi Arabia is Germany's second most important trading partner in the Arab region, and Germany is Saudi Arabia's fourth largest supplier. So I would like to know from you, somebody already mentioned that addressing the economy is also important to raise awareness for human rights. And so I would like to know how you assess the actual situation of the economic cooperation. Does this have any influence on the human rights situation? And I'm very grateful that you really, each of you mentioned the social dimension of human and women rights violations. And we already talked about the symbol of the driver's license for women, but this is for sure, this is a privileged issue, because when we look at the situation of the domestic workers, of migrant workers that you were talking about, none of them, they are all far away from making a driver's license or getting a driver's license. And the situation is even more precarious when you look at the question, how can they get access to any right, to any legal system? And so I'm very, very grateful that you are also looking at this very black point in the reality of your countries. And I also have a very special question, as I'm the vice chairperson of our parliamentarian friendship group, Germany and the Arabic-speaking countries of Near and Middle East, as we call it, which also includes all the member countries of GCR. I would like you to give me some advice what especially our group could do to support you and your demands, and how we should act and react when we meet with our counterparts from your countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. And finally, Frank, what's your question?
I have lots of questions, but I will put it into two to three. Thank you very much from my side too. I remember having, in my 14, 16 years when I was very young, friends in prison, but that was still distant. It was not brother or sister. And I know what that made to me. So yes, the first question is what some of my colleagues have asked sort of for Daniela and now Catherine. Now, we cannot ask you what your wish is, but what would be your priorities of our action? Some said it is this this resolution, that's one of the steps, but we, and that's different to sign a resolution as a member of a parliament's party and if not, but still, what are the things that really make sense on your side that we really as parliamentarians can do? Sometimes we just walk across or just beside the goal, just for a few centimeters. And then there are two other questions. The one is, one of you has mentioned how in the GCC there is some cooperation, maybe in human rights defenders, other organizations. But how is that? Are there links in between the countries, women's organizations, other human rights defenders, besides now talking to us and maybe international human rights organizations? Is there a liaison? Are there reactions, not just by them, but also by other Arab countries to these issues? Not just the GCC or the 7 or whatever. So I would like to know what would really encourage you as a wish, and are there other partners that we should talk to too and encourage them? And the last one would be a political question, and that is, maybe our ears have heard and our foreign ministry has heard always the good news from your prince and their foreign messengers. But some say there is a positive process in some areas. Let's say some talk about a paradigm change, a new society contract. You know, I'm just receiver of messages, but I don't know how these words trigger in your ears. You know, is there a going back of the influence of clerics, at least to a certain extent? That would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I just want to add a short and brief question as well. So what I wonder is the process of reforms that Mohammed bin Salam was introducing the last years. So I wonder, and in my mind, he's very aware that the future of the economy in Saudi Arabia is not the oil business anymore, and he has to change. Tourism, for instance, is a very important branch, and others as well. So do you think there is a kind of window of opportunity now to address also in the same time the questions and the issues of women's equality, because he knows that he has to change. And while the killing of Khashoggi, he ruined I say not just a little bit, but most of all, the image of the Saudi Arabian state. So do you think there is a kind of window of opportunity to influence what he's going to do next? So and maybe Lina can start with the answers, and the others will follow, I'm sure. So Lina, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you all for the questions. I'll try to remember all the details of the questions. So for the first question regarding the trials in international courts, I will first talk about the trial that's starting in Germany. I think we should really not underestimate the weight it has. Maybe the outcome of the trial won't be a sentencing, but what keeps our government, and especially MBS, walking with such pride and you know, he feels empowered, is impunity. So knowing that someone is at least trying to sentence him, for us Saudi people is Hala, you can contradict me, or Ala, if you don't agree, but for us it's a very good sign to see that someone is trying to deal with all these crimes, because in Saudi Arabia it's impossible. I mean, there's just no one has a voice anymore. Whoever even tweets, people who have been trying to talk about Lujain have been imprisoned. So it's really an atmosphere of fear, and no one dares to talk. No one will even, if we don't applaud the crown prince enough, they could get arrested. So really, I think that the trial, especially now the one in Germany, is important to speak about. And I have been in contact with Reporters Without Borders, and I've heard and I've been told that, of course, it's a political one, and honestly, we can. The first step before the trial is the preliminary investigation, and before even the judge starts the trial, if there is this investigation, whoever has been named in the trial, when they come to Germany, they can be investigated. So I think it's up to the political sphere of Germany, and with us, the civil society, pushing for it and showing the courts in Germany that it's a case that is very important, that it should not be dismissed, and at least the first step of it, the investigation should start, so that whoever tries to flee Germany because now they can't go to the US will be investigated in Germany, and they won't walk free within your country. So I think that you really have to push for it, and and show support to this trial, with without saying that they're culprits, but at least for justice. And I think you have a role in this, and really push for it. For the ICC, I mean, of course, as I said, anything that shows our government that they're not untouchable is good for me, and I think that's the only thing that could make them not stop, but at least calm down, and their crimes is showing them that they're not untouchable. The other question was what other things could be made within the Western or the German political sphere, and Hala can also talk about it. But as I said, civil society has no place in Saudi Arabia now. The only people who can speak are the ones who are abroad. So I think we should have an official voice in these conversations. There is the political party that has just been launched recently. It's the first one in Saudi Arabia, and of course it's not within Saudi Arabia, but I personally think, and I don't think it's impossible, that when German politicians have a conversation with the Saudi officials, at the table there should be also the civil society, or at least people from this political party invited to speak, because Saudi Arabia doesn't want to hear us, doesn't want to hear anyone, and they won't even hear you. So at least I think just having the presence of someone who is contradicting them, maybe they will, you will have more leverage when you speak to them, because they will know that there's another voice that could be heard. So I think legitimizing Saudi people, legitimizing civil society, giving them a real voice, listening to them, and again, also, when I talk about Lujain, it's not only to show the oppression that there is in Saudi Arabia, but because I know that people are scared in Saudi now. There's a collective punishment. My family is on a travel ban. Many of the detainees' family are on travel ban. So what's important to note is that when a Saudi person talks about a relative, this relative should be named. The German politicians should name these Saudis who are in prison, who are tortured, and name them, ask about them. When you engage with them, give the details that the families give you. It's not only for general knowledge, it's really so that you can confront them with the narratives that they give you. For example, Mr. Heinrich, you were also saying that you hear a lot about Saudis, but when we give you personal stories, it's also for you to be able to confront them with facts. When we give all the details about Lujain's trial, about the torture, about the illegal detention, the disappearance, it's because you can have a name, you can have facts, and you can confront them with them. And it's not easy for us, but we have taken this on us. Dare do it. It's the fact, and it's a general situation in Saudi Arabia. So I think what's important is that when you engage with Saudis, you name the people, you give facts, and you question them about the details that we give. What was the other questions? Or maybe I can give the floor to Hala.
Maybe afterwards, Lina, we come back to you. So yeah. Maybe Hala, you might add something concerning the situation of the parliamentarians. So what is your analysis? What could we do? And maybe you have some advices for us.
That's a very important question, in fact, because I think the leverage that the legislative leverage that a parliament has, not necessarily to come up with an actionable plan, but come up with enough awareness to engage with the counterparts, whether they are on the business community or friendship community, like Ms. Vogler said, the EU Middle Eastern committees and different committees. It is good to be well informed about the restrictions imposed on women. I just wanted to answer a question on whether there were any kinds of organizations outside of the state or grassroots organizations in which women could connect or somehow connect the society to decision makers or to the media or to the state decision makers. Unfortunately not. There is an agreement actually inside the GCC countries called the Gulf Security Agreement, by which most of the cybersecurity laws, most of the counterterrorism laws are replicated across those countries. And it is within the realm of any country or the jurisdiction of any country to request from any other GCC countries to arrest those people who are tweeting about human rights or who are offending, who are perceived as offensive. And actually, the majority of people arrested in Kuwait between 2010 to now, actually, were arrested by the request of the Saudi regime. And they were Kuwaiti citizens. And this just highlight, as Lena has mentioned, that there is no space for people to organize outside of the state. There is the charity organization that has been always chaired by members of the ruling family in a way to ensure that the control of the ruling family of what activity, what initiative, and to ensure that they are central to those kinds of services so that the people will remain dependent on them. It's just a way to enforce loyalty, if you would think of it. So this is something that the attack on civil society is happening across the GCC countries and the Arab countries. And if you look at the gender gap reports, Middle Eastern countries in general scores the least actually across different regions of the world in terms of gender gap indexes. I wanted also to say something about the impunity and the Magnitsky Acts and how to transfer this kind of transparency that is happening now in the US into more of a constraints to autocratic leaders, violations of human rights, or constraints related to gender violation or gender gap violations. It's always good to encourage, and I can see that is happening, that Saudi Arabia always wanted to rank first when it comes to, and they have actually most of the PIP work or most of the statements of officials in Saudi Arabia have actually used the progress in women's rights and the legal reforms in women's rights as a way to refurbish their image in international fora. And World Bank, for instance, they're celebrating how legal reforms when it comes to women's rights in the economy or in civil affairs have actually been the fastest in the region, compared to the other countries. So it's good also to do that, but it is a problematic thing to provide impunity for one person. For instance, one of the main concerns I had when it comes to the declassified report of the CIA is that all the 73 persons who were sanctioned were actually ordered to do that by Mohammed bin Salman and by King Salman himself. King Salman remains the head of the state. There is no investigation that happened, despite the fact that he was contacted by President Trump and by other leaders, to be informed about the interrogation without any kinds of repercussion or consequences to those involved, whether his son or the crown prince or the other people involved. In fact, Saud al-Qahtani was one of the people who were very much identified, whether it's in the activists or the Jamal Khashoggi's murder or in other media outlets, has actually walked free. I agree with Lena that having the voices of representative of the Saudi activist or the Saudi political activists like the NAS party present when there's an engagement with the Saudi counterparts, just a way to give them the legitimacy and the protection and to have the government somehow, to have, as Lena mentioned, it's a way to make the government more transparent, because they cannot really refute that when their own citizens are claiming those issues, when their own citizens who are working on these issues are present on those meetings. So this is one way of doing it. But also another way of doing it is through the agreements. So for instance, the business agreement that we've seen, for instance, the Israeli government will not grant access to the hacking softwares to other governments, which is solely sold for hacking activists, basically, for other governments, without the approval of the Ministry of Defense, and ensuring that those softwares are only used in means that are not trespassing or impinging on human rights. That is not happening across the board when it comes to business. So, and of course, there's all kinds of violations, but the reputation of the company has been deteriorated big time because of that, because that they say that we are having balances and checks and orders to ensure that those countries are actually following our standards when using the software. But of course, we know in reality, none of these countries are doing so, but the reputation of the company has been very much deteriorated. This could be replicated in different business sections. The FDA has certain regulation, for instance, for allowing certain drugs. But again, companies doing business with other companies in the Western, in the EU or in the US, who are doing business with regimes well known to basically have a severe or grave violations of human rights or of women's rights, should be made to respect gender mainstreaming. So if we really want to uphold the Beijing recommendations, if we want to have gender mainstreaming as part of our business climate, it should be part as well of the practices of the government. And it's within the hands of those parliamentary committees that regulates business relations, that regulates recommendations, to look into what kinds of recommendation. Germany is perfectly suited to do that. They have a very good partnership with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is actually a main partner when it comes to purchasing trade from, it's not necessarily arms, but other kinds of the medical equipments and other things. So I think they have a leverage to be used, and it should be used. This leverage should identify certain standards expected when it comes to the role of women, in the civil society, women journalists, women activists, is the Saudi regime. And it can be, those information are publicly available. We work really hard to make, as Lina mentioned, to make those information and the research, for instance, on the situation of women's rights available through Al-Qist, through other Saudi involved, other organizations involved in human rights. And I'm going to stop here and leave the floor for Julia for more.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please. But we are running out of time. Just very briefly, Lina, please.
Okay, just very briefly. As Hala just said, there is leverage, and I just want to add, there is even more leverage since MBS, because he's unstable within his own family, within the country, within the international community. So we really have to take the opportunity of this instability that he is in to impose some with Saudi Arabia before having any kind of relations with the MBS or Saudi Arabia.
So let's thank you, Lina, for adding this. Ala, what do you think? Which kind of leverage should we use? Most of all, the economy, who have to be linked with the situation of human rights, and especially the rights of women, or most of all the International Criminal Court? What do you think, with your view on the whole region of the Gulf countries?
Yes, I think it depends on the capacity within the available actions in your institutions or in your organization. So that depends on the capacity, but mainly I think the most powerful tool to use is to stop these arms deals or economic deals, and not to compromise the human rights values in exchange with these economic interests. But I want to answer another question, is that you mentioned that there is a change and there is a positive change inside the region. I beg you not to be fooled by the UAE pattern or the UAE example of what's going on, because this possibly could really deceive some international community or organizations that there is a change inside the country, but this change is not really targeting the needs or targeting the one who's really want to use it in a proper way. This makes it really hard for us to negotiate any kind of rights that we are looking for, and we want to change it, because they said to us, look, at you have a welfare life, you have rights and laws, you have your federal or national council, which is the parliament, are 50% women in it. So, but it's not true, because there is no any kind of legislative authority within the hands of this parliament. So sometimes change could have a worse impact in the human rights if it's not really full rights, if it's not really complete in that way. So we are asking for a real change, a clear change, not a change that just could be used an excuse of changing the situation. And I think tackling the economic side of deals, stopping this surveillance equipment deals, for example, and within all the countries, European countries or other countries, and arms deals, it's very important thing, and it will really have a direct impact and will allow the authority to rethink of their approach towards their own people. Another question of the cooperation between all the GCC countries activists. We unfortunately don't have a floor for civil society, so we don't have a floor for any kind of doing a simple assembly or starting a society or starting a very small center or organization for that. So we are all working from abroad, and we are trying to unite as activists outside our region, and we find there is a lot of similarities between us and the violations of human rights. That's what we are trying to do, and to be aware of what's going on, and not to be fooled of this bright example of another country, because we don't want someone to find that they are reaching goals, but it's not really what they want.
Thank you so much, Allah. Maybe before we can close this very fruitful dialogue, Julia, would you like to have the floor maybe for a final remark? So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, I think Mrs. Vogler raised a point that is very important, the business relationships between Germany and Saudi Arabia. So we need to, of course, because there's a lot of money and influence at stake. I mean, if our GDP depends on certain companies doing business with countries like Saudi Arabia, then that is relevant, and then that kind of ties political action into these business transactions. So we are trying also to engage business, large businesses, trying to ask them to abide by the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, to do due diligence, which in Saudi Arabia is not possible, because due diligence means you need to speak with civil society and see, what are the human rights risks in the country. If there's no independent civil society, you cannot do that. So you risk to also contribute to human rights abuses. If we look at the kafala system under which migrant workers are operating in Saudi Arabia, there's a long list of abuses under this kafala system. So anyone who will engage migrant workers in their operations will also, be responsible for human rights abuses. So our strategy is to try to engage them, try to assist them in using their leverage. But then ultimately, if that doesn't help, there's also obviously from the side of the point of the civil society, the strategy of naming and shaming, and then trying to use, international pressure to expose that certain businesses don't seem to care about the human rights situation in the country. Very quickly, I think for the referral to the ICC, I mean, that clearly is an important point that is also important in relation to the violations happening in Yemen, committed also by Saudi and the UAE. And as Lina said quite rightfully, something like the lawsuit just filed by Reporters Without Borders is a symbol. It's a symbol to the people that the international community cares, and that impunity is no longer an option. And I totally agree, impunity is the enemy of justice, and we have to do something about that. If you think about how meaningful the recent sentence was in Karlsruhe on the torturers in Syria, that is really where international justice is achieved. So I would love to see politicians back these kind of actions, so international criminal actions where they can be filed of universal jurisdiction. Lastly, to the wishes there are plenty, but maybe just to focus on some. We have seen that what happens at the UN level does have an influence also on Saudi Arabia. So after these 3 joint statements, we're currently trying to gain support by some of the UN member states to table a resolution on Saudi Arabia, establishing a monitoring and reporting mechanism on Saudi Arabia. Germany could try, I mean, probably through the Foreign Office and the mission in Geneva and so on, to support that effort. We're currently going after the states who have been leading these joint statements. Germany co-signed but did not lead, but I'm sure that if one of those states would be willing to table a resolution, they would be looking for supporters. So if Germany can be supportive to such an effort, that would make a big change. So lastly, just I think to a question you asked, Mr. Heinrich, on what to believe when the Saudi authorities come in and talk about these reforms and how there's really a positive change. I mean, for sure, it makes a difference that women can drive. I think it's not necessary to applaud the Saudi government that they finally granted that right, but surely it makes a difference that there's not such strong gender segregation in public life anymore. Sure, but I think it may be a way that politicians can counter, or not counter, but respond to that narrative, is to say, well, if you are really genuinely interested in reforming, take these reforms further, make them structural reforms, make them real legal reforms, make them available, to everyone, and I mean, allow for civil society to be part of the reform process. It cannot just be a reform like a carrot and the stick, and a little bit of carrot is imposed from the state to the people. The people need to be part of that reform effort, and they need to be heard and at the forefront of it. As long as critical civil society is nothing but jailed, I think there's a way of encouraging the Saudi authorities, to take these reforms further. And yeah, that's, I think, what I would like to say.
Yes, thank you so much, Julia, and all of you. And we were running out of time, but I think it doesn't matter, because nobody went out to this meeting. So you see how interested we are in the situation in Saudi Arabia, and most of all in the condition of life for women in Saudi Arabia. But Allah, thank you for this. Also in the other countries in the Gulf region, it's very important for this. And thank you that you confronted us to all the leverages and the opportunities that we have as MPs, but we should use that, and one thing that I wonder, and maybe I'm sure we could discuss the whole night, but what I wonder is if we could have a kind of campaign to support women's rights in Saudi Arabia, but also in all the other, I should say, feudalistic states, where we think that we need real reforms and not only masquerades. A kind of campaign with the title, "Call Them by Their Name," so that they are not forgotten. I think this could be one of the campaigns we should do, even if, as Guido Jensen mentioned it, we are in the last lack of time to this legislative period, but maybe we have a chance to do that. But one of I think as a feminist, I all times think, I like this idea of our Swedish colleagues who said, so we have to to reflect the so-called 3R model. So this is the question of representation, the question of reality, and the question of resources that women have in the different countries. So I all times think that we should add two questions more, or two issues more. It's the question of reporting, so linked to the question of reality, and most of all of the economic situation of women, because if you have a better conditions to participate on the labor market or on the economy, you have more rights in the same time. So I'm convinced this is one of the most important issues. But my fifth R is the question of resilience. So, and we have learned during this silly pandemic that we have to do a bit more of our work and to be more aware of this. Thank you for keeping in touch already now, and I'm sure we will do that in a few weeks again, so that you can see that all this information were so helpful for us to move and to go forward and to support you. Thank you. Have a nice evening, and let's keep in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.